Sarah, I'm going to jump in because we're getting pictures now of what's called the family photo here at the G20. And any of you watching who are body language experts, we need your help on this because all of the leaders are gathering and everyone is watching this very keenly because it's the first proper sight we've had of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in the same place. There's Justin Trudeau, you can see Prime Minister Modi from India, there's Shinzo Abe from Japan, Donald Tusk, President of the European Council, Vladimir Putin, the Russian President. There's President Erdogan next to Vladimir Putin. A lot of the protesters I've spoken to in the last 48 hours say their ire is directed primarily towards Trump, Erdogan and Putin. They put those three men in the same category, although we should say the three men do not put themselves in the same category. Right in the centre of what is primarily a large group of men, although there's Theresa May wearing a blue jacket on the second row, Prime Minister of the UK, of course. Right in the centre is Angela Merkel. She is the host of this G20 summit. It's come down to her to set the agenda. There's Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission. It gives you an idea when you look at these pictures of quite what a concentration of powerful people this is. You could argue that any of the top world leaders with real sway over what's happening in our world are all within that one photo call that's taking place at the moment. And the argument behind the G20 is that it does that. It delivers everyone into one environment in which they can take policy decisions which can then be implemented. Bearing in mind, there goes Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. We hear that Emmanuel Macron may have just swapped positions with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was towards the edge of that photo call. Lots of people analysing every last detail in how the leaders are interacting. There's Donald Trump just at the back of the group, stepping. Is that Emmanuel Macron? I'm seeing him from behind. I'm pretty sure that's Emmanuel Macron, the President of France. And bear in mind, these two men have had a difficult exchange of views on climate change. Donald Trump pulling America out of the Paris Agreement. Emmanuel Macron by responding, saying, make our planet great again, and saying France is willing to welcome all climate scientists from the US who are struggling to get the support they need. So very, very interesting to see Emmanuel Macron. I saw him at the EU Summit a couple of weeks ago in Brussels. It was his debut at an EU Summit, and the confidence he exuded, regardless of what you think about his politics, was striking. He is a relatively young leader, but he looked very comfortable on the global stage. There's Vladimir Putin in conversation with Angela Merkel. They have an awful lot to talk about because while they may have their differences on climate change, the number one issue for Angela Merkel, they both actually agree. They have both praised the Paris Climate Accord and have both stated their countries are willing to commit to its implementation. Where they don't agree, though, is that Russia is on the receiving end of sanctions from the West because of its annexation of Crimea in 2014 and also because of its involvement in the east of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly said he would like those sanctions eased. So far, the West has shown itself not to be inclined to do that, so perhaps that subject is coming up. And then there's the issue of NATO. Russia has repeatedly in recent years criticized NATO's expansion towards the east of Europe, and yesterday we had Donald Trump in Poland speaking just 300 kilometers from the Russian border, praising the efforts of American troops in Poland. There are several thousand, praising the Polish commitment to NATO and also reaffirming America's commitment to NATO as well. So what is extraordinary about this G20 summit, it's not just that these world leaders are all in one place, and that doesn't happen very often, but it's the scale of the issues they're grappling with, whether it's global security, global finance, climate change, or the nature of trade, and the fact that for the first time we have a real space in terms of approach between the United States and many of the other world powers. And this is really our first chance to see, there is the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to see how these different approaches by Donald Trump will play out. Some people are saying this is America stepping away from its global leadership role, particularly on issues of trade and climate change. America's coming out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Donald Trump is known for his enthusiasm for protectionism, for tariffs. He says, I'm going to put America first, and he's been hugely critical of free trade agreements like the North Africa Free Trade Agreement. So why we're watching this very closely is to try and see whether perhaps on those issues of trade or climate change, either the French and the Germans, who are very strong at the last EU summit, or perhaps the Russian and the Chinese will take a further step into a leadership role. Remember, President Xi of China was in Moscow ahead of this G20 summit when North Korea carried out that missile test a few days ago. The main statement to come out immediately was from the Russians and the Chinese, calling not just on North Korea to cease its testing, but also calling on the Americans and the South Koreans to stop their large-scale military exercises. Of course, a few hours later, we also got condemnation from Donald Trump, who, of North Korea's behavior, has said it's been very bad and has promised to take severe action. Again, the questions, and that's why we're watching this so closely, is can Donald Trump fashion a unified response to the threat from North Korea, along with the Chinese, who share a border with North Korea, and the Russians? And that's what we're going to be watching very, very closely. There's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. In fact, I've just seen one of the senior figures from his security detail walk by. He is known for his commitment to climate change policy, his commitment to the Paris Climate Accord. So he will be one of a number of world leaders pressing Donald Trump to perhaps reconsider withdrawing from Paris, although that would be an extraordinary U-turn. I wouldn't expect that. But at least to pressure Donald Trump to further his commitment to responding to the threat of climate change, whether inside or outside of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And just to remind you, that Paris Agreement offers a number of commitments. The only 3 countries who aren't signatories are Nicaragua, Syria, and now America. Those who are signatories are committed to keeping our global temperature to below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. In fact, the longer-term ambition is to keep it to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Just as I'm talking to you there's Vladimir Putin and President Zuma. President Zuma has been under extraordinary political pressure at home from both within sections of his ANC party and from opposition parties like the DP. He may, his critics may say, be enjoying a couple of days outside of South Africa, a chance to step away from those relentless political pressures that exist. But a number of you watching have been asking if Africa is represented. Well, South Africa is the only country which is part of the G20, but actually the African Union is also represented as well. And in fact, it's worth saying that despite its name, G20, there are many more than 20 countries and institutions represented. For instance, Spain has been specially invited despite not technically being within the G20. The African Union is represented, the World Trade Organization. I just saw Christine Lagarde, she's head of the International Monetary Fund. She's here as well. So actually, the name is slightly misleading. This is a huge gathering of the world's most powerful and influential figures. I was just mentioning the Paris Accord, as well as those temperature targets. There's also a commitment to every country measuring its emissions every 5 years, and a commitment to what's called climate finance. That's jargon for richer countries providing financial support to developing countries so that they can take on changes that will aid efforts to take on climate change while not suffering financially. So a number of commitments, but America will not be taking those because it's pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Now, this is interesting. Emmanuel Macron, Donald Trump, and Angela Merkel deep in conversation. We all remember that handshake when Mr. Macron and Mr. Trump met a few weeks back. They didn't want to let go of each other's hands. It was a test of strength. Mr. Macron even acknowledged that he wanted to go into that handshake, showing that he was intent to look Donald Trump in the eye and assert French policy in the face of American disagreement. So, fascinating to see these group leaders coming together. We're going to watch very carefully what they say to each other. Not all of it's going to be available for us to listen into, but we are going to get lots of briefings after the meetings. There'll also be press conferences as well. And I'll be live from right here in the G20 Summit throughout the day. If you have particular questions you'd like me to pick up on, I am on Twitter right now at BBC Ros Atkins, taking questions from all around the world. So send your question my way, and I promise I'll get you an answer.